Good morning, evening, everybody, and welcome to our Tech Talk today. Today's webinar is part of the Tech Talk X series by Digital at INSEAD. It's dedicated to exploring new technologies, digital typically, but today we're going to talk about deep tech and their applications as well as their impact on management, business, and society. For more information, please visit the Digital at INSEAD website. And many thanks to our sponsor, Accenture, for allowing us to host this fabulous series. Before I introduce today's amazing panel, or ask my colleague Adrian Johnson to do this, let me do some housekeeping, a little bit of webinar etiquette, if you will. Audience is muted, and video and chat functions are disabled. Should you have questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A tab. Questions should be short and to the point. To help us identify the most relevant questions, you can vote on the existing questions. This webinar is indeed being recorded, and should you encounter any technical issues, email us at digital@insead.edu. Thank you. And so, Adrian, I think I'll hand it off to you at this point.
Okay, thank you very much, Bill, and welcome everybody to this webinar. We are really delighted to have three esteemed guests joining us. So Sara Nunez Garcia, who's the co-founding partner of 4051 Ventures, also an INSEAD alumna, and a great contributor to courses that Bill and I have been running over the last decade or so, and extremely experienced in the domain of deep tech from the investor side. But I'll let her introduce herself properly in a second. We're also delighted to have Ravikumar join us, who's also been a great friend of INSEAD and helped Bill and I craft and create a great course that we run with some of our MBA students and a lot of our Gemba students, which is a deep tech commercialization course we run in collaboration with CERN. So Ash is joining us from CERN in Geneva. He's the Entrepreneurship Development Officer there. And last but not least, we're delighted to have Gaurav Tomar, who's a recent student from our deep tech commercialization program that we did. I think Gaurav was on our program last year, just last year, and actually took one of the innovations out of that program and is now turning it into a business. So he's at the moment principal industry manager at MathWorks, but is the co-founder of this new venture, deep tech venture, Green Brew, and he's joining us from Munich. So Bill, at this point, should I hand over to our participants to introduce themselves, or would you like to do that after you've done your presentation?
No, why don't you ask them to introduce themselves now, Adrian?
Okay, fantastic. So Sara, can I ask you to switch your camera on and tell us a little bit more about what you do?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks again for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. So I'm one of the co-founding partners of 4051 Ventures, which is a biotech fund that we created about 2 years ago here in Switzerland, and is fully dedicated to venture creation. So we identify fantastic technologies and assets, diligence them, and then incorporate companies. So we're founding investors of these companies and then start bringing the team. So it's a fully dedicated fund to biotech, to serving high unmet needs for patients.
Okay, fantastic. So we look forward to finding out, getting your insight into this terrific field shortly when we get into the questions. Thank you, Sara. Ash, can you tell us a little bit about what you do at CERN and your, excuse the pun, but your deep knowledge of deep tech?
Good day, Adrian. Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me. So my role is twofold. One is to look at how we have inventions from CERN that can fit into a go-to-market strategy of an existing startup. So we give the tools for them to go to market. And the other one is to create more deep tech founders from CERN. So those are my two big mandates, and been an exciting journey so far.
Thank you, Ash. And Gaurav, tell us a little bit more about what you're doing, and particularly, obviously the Green Brew venture that you're now launching.
Thank you for the tee up, Adrian. At MathWorks, I'm responsible for connecting some of our innovators and engineers in the transportation sector with our development teams to ensure that those innovations come to market. And MathWorks, as you know, makes MATLAB and Simulink, which are the tools that are used as the language of engineering and science over the past 40 years. And as you rightly pointed out, so post the deep tech commercialization project, I'm now developing a carbon capture and utilization venture called Green Brew. And there we are going to use photobioreactors and grow microculture algae to then sequestrate carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases and generate something utilizable, which also has value at the end.
Fantastic. So we can have a beer and not feel guilty about our carbon impact.
You can have the cake and eat it too.
Fantastic. Thanks. Thank you very much, Gaurav, and we look forward to hearing more about that during the Q&A. So at this point, let me hand back to Bill, who'll take us through a few slides to introduce the topic of deep tech.
Thank you, Adrian. Can Sandra, if you could bring up our first slide before we get to the more interesting part of today's presentation, if we can just I'm going to just set the stage for what we're going to dig into for the hour. So deep tech, just to put a definition on it, and there are many definitions, but this is the one that Adrian and I have been tending to use in our courses. It's novel science or engineering innovations. That's the key differentiator, creating immense value. Now, this value can be economic value, it can be societal value. There are many different forms of value, but creating immense value in commercial markets. Next slide, please. So the promise, and next slide, please. The promise. So we're going to look at a little bit about the promise, and then the challenges, or what we call the peril. So the promise is we're really tackling today's biggest societal challenges with deep tech innovations. These include food shortages, knowledge scaling, if you will, through the use of semiconductors and storage technologies like batteries, renewable energy. We have healthcare and sciences around biopharma. We have cybersecurity, space technologies, manufacturing efficiencies through robotics, and probably most importantly, possibly, is global warming. Okay, next slide, please. So there are a wave of innovation cycles. I think we've all seen this one. The most recent started back in the 80s, and it was really around software, the internet, software as a service, and this thing we call new media. There's a new wave that's been launching recently to tackle many of the challenges that I've highlighted in the recent, just the most recent slide. And these really revolve around science-based innovations. Next slide, please. AI is a big one, robotics and technology. Now, I always put this slide up because Ash loves this slide. Because what it really shows is that one of the advantages of deep tech investing and venture creation is that you can leverage a tremendous amount of science development from departments of defense, departments of energy, national and international research centers like CERN, and many, many more. So if you just look at the innovations that went into the iPhone that Apple was able to leverage in the development of their brilliant tool, it allows them to stand on the shoulders of giants to make these massive leap forwards without having to do all the R&D themselves. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of generating VC level returns, we are seeing a return to what we these days call deep tech. Back when I was a venture capitalist, we just called it tech. There was a lot of chip investments, chip design investments, photonic lasers, photonic equipment, and these required a lot of deep science development, a lot of capital to get them funded. That the interest in that went away, and there was a move towards shallow tech. I'm just using this word shallow tech to mean everything that's not deep tech. But deep tech has come roaring back in interest because its rate of returns has generated by the capital invested per BCG and Frequent shows that it's matching what we've seen in shallow tech over the last 20 years. The M&A statistics, the IPO statistics, that is, how do you generate these returns, are pretty much equal with what we're seeing in other asset classes. So it's back on the map. Next slide, please. It's an industry favorite, as by this research by dealroom.co. It's the top of the league charts for sector interest by at least European VC funds. The next chart, please. And I do think that's pretty much mirrored in the US and elsewhere as well. Next chart, next slide. Valuations, one of the reasons there's a tremendous amount of interest in it is public valuations. The 7 of the top 10 publicly traded companies in the world are either wholly or partially allocating a lot of their capital into deep tech innovation development. Private fundraisings in 2024, 7 of the top 15, so about half, are either been in AI, pharmaceuticals, applied intuition is in the automated, autonomous driving. So these are all deep tech fundraisings, raising hundreds of millions, or in some cases, billions of dollars in a single round. Next slide, please. Unicorn exits have been growing tremendously. Next slide. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. These are the verticals. That didn't come out too well. What it shows is the verticals that they're in. We'll let you refer to this if you are interested from the slides when they're available. Next slide, please. And these are some of the unicorns that we've seen in the past few years. Now, this is from 2021. The group that puts this out, MFV, is going to have a new chart this year showing the more recent dinosaurs, unicorns. But as you can see, there are quite a few, and the list is growing. Rapidly. Next slide, please. So the story's just been beautiful, right? But there are unique challenges to deep tech venture development and to those brave souls like Sara who put their capital into them. So let's just take a couple slides and look at the Peril. Next slide, please. So the risk profile for deep tech innovation development is different from shallow tech. Yes, both of them have technology risk, product development risk, and market risk, but it's weighted much more heavily, the technology risk and the science risk, much more heavily for deep tech companies. Their market risk isn't as acute because if they can get this deep technology into market, there is often a market for it. So that is indeed the distinction here. Next slide, please. So because of that, what you see are the things that they need to be aware of and resolve, at least in the eyes of their investors and other stakeholders, is this R&D period, which is much longer, requires a lot more to capital. The technology risk, that is proving out the science, is obviously much more acute than for a digital solution. Scaling challenges can be quite onerous, and they have to seek out qualified staff or specialists to be working in their labs or even understand how to sell these innovations that they're developing. So they often have sales engineers as just opposed to generalists that they hire through LinkedIn, for example. But the beautiful thing is the market need is more often defined early on, and they're working towards this North Star, if you will. And the competition is lower because they have much richer collection of IP, patents, and other things that they can build a moat around their innovations with. And with that, I think we'll hand it off to you, Adrian. I think this is a good setup to now go to our panelists and talk about the questions you may have for them.
Okay, thanks a lot, Bill. That was a great introduction to this wonderful wonderful topic. And for those of you who are interested, actually, Ash and I were just last week at the conference Hello Tomorrow, which is a Paris-based group, and that's a great conference if you are interested in the topic of sort of meeting all the stakeholders and players. A little bit Eurocentric, perhaps, but there were actually still nevertheless quite a lot of people from Asia, Middle East, and the Americas as well. So maybe on that note, it's a good, maybe I'll kick off with a question to Ash. because one of the, the challenges is, taking this deep science, deep technology out of the lab. The people who've created it are maybe not the kind of people who are maybe entrepreneurs. Some are, but generally we're talking about people who've been either in academia or, in the lab most of their careers. So Ash, how do you at CERN approach the challenge of fostering a culture of entrepreneurship among scientists and engineers who are primarily focused on research and development?
Sure thing, Adrian. Look, I mean, the challenge is not, it's universal across all research institutes. I reckon the way we go about it is, meet them at their level. My always standard line is, you've already done the hard part, which is the science. All of the other services you can buy or build. If you want marketing, hire somebody from INSEAD who's actually a marketing guru rather than trying to understand marketing. So you can get those service levels outside, but it's always the existing dogma out there is that you need to be a CEO with all of these varietal expertise, which is not necessarily true. So the earliest step is, build your product, find somebody who can buy it, or you have a value proposition that meets, then all of the other services you can build. So that's pretty much where we go with.
Okay, fantastic. And that's actually a good segue to my question to Sara, where, you have to have a really long-term perspective. So you're coming into innovations which are at a very early stage. And you might not see even a product, let alone customers, for many years. So how do you assess and mitigate the risks associated with those kind of deep tech investments?
Yeah, indeed. Thanks for the question. I think our industry, the drug industry, is a heavily regulated industry. I think how we manufacture the product, how we run a trial is extremely regulated by the bodies. And the bar to approval is high, it gets higher and long. I think at the end of the day, when we look at companies, we always look at them through the same lens. What are the risks associated with the biology risk, manufacturing, preclinical models, human relevant models, how to do trials. So, financing, competition. So they're always there, right? So we try to go with open eyes. Funnily, when I started 10, 12 years ago investing, you're so naive, you think that everything is going to work, right? And through the years, you get to a point, 2, 3 years into investing, you think like nothing works. Every day you have problems and problems and problems. And you feel like then you get paralyzed. It's like there's so many problems. And then you sort of recover and you learn from having invested in many companies, having run many companies, what are the risks that you have to be aware of. And unfortunately, many of the risks is things that you cannot control. It's good to be aware of them and how to mitigate them, but it's things that you cannot control, and risk changes over time. So it's good to build this thick skin to really, when you see the problem, react very quickly, because you cannot just be paralyzed because there's so many risks that are changing over time.
And Sara, maybe just a quick follow-up. When you're approached by an entrepreneur or scientist who has a project, is there sort of a quick checklist that you have where you say, okay, this is a no-go, or this is definitely a very good possibility? Is there a sort of playbook there where you can quickly do an assessment and a filtering?
For the project itself, you mean?
The project, maybe the team. Maybe there's something you see in the team that you like.
Yeah, at the end of the day, it's the judgment of the team. So yes, it's time and cost. So time and budget. And I think for us, it's very good to talk to them about the risks. Risk of getting, for example, a manufacturing slot. There are some modalities in biotech, gene therapy, gene editing. It takes a long time to get a manufacturing GMP slot. And if somebody in the team says, oh, no, in 2 months I can get you slot, well, that's not true, because it's much longer than that. So I think their judgment, how they see the world, how they appreciate the risks, I think it's something that we do upfront to make sure that we also have the right people appreciating the right risks, but also with the ability to grow once they see the risks or the problems coming up.
Okay, thank you, Sara. So let me move over to Gaurav. You're a fresh, new deep tech entrepreneur. So maybe, well, you might want to tell us a little bit more about the innovation you've taken, and just for the audience, the course that we run on deep tech commercialization, Bill and I run at INSEAD, mostly for Gemba students, our global executive MBA program, on which Gaurav was a student last year. We have projects and innovations from CERN, but also last year we had from the European Space Agency. And Gaurav's project was one of the European Space Agency's innovations, something that's being used in space. So maybe you could just, Gaurav, tell us a little bit about how you took, something that was working in space, brought it back down to Earth, and also maybe the challenges you've had of taking that innovation out of the lab as an entrepreneur and a businessman.
Yeah, for sure. So the innovation that you're talking about is from the European Space Agency. It's a photobioreactor, which is supposed to keep astronauts alive on long-term space flights, so more than a year, for example, when reaching to Mars, and then generate about 20 to 30% of their food as well in the process. So it's a closed loop system with the human in the loop. And we, from the INSEAD side, as business students, were coming at this innovation from a business angle, as Ash said, right? So if you are an innovator, then don't try to necessarily understand marketing. You can hire someone for that, or partner up with someone for that. So that's what we did. We looked at what are some of the business problems existing on Earth for which this innovation can be repurposed. So one of the use cases that we found is that in the carbonated beverage industry, there's quite a bit of residual greenhouse gases that is still let out in the atmosphere. So we saw that as an opportunity that this can be captured and converted into biomass that can be utilized for different kinds of chemical products, as well as animal food, for example, and basically capturing carbon and generating money at the end of it. So that's our model, and we call it the forest in a box. And I would like to give virtual high fives to both Ash and Sara, because they already laid out some of the topics that I'm going to give real world examples of. So Sara talked about risks. So one of the main risks I would say is that we encountered was that the science works in proof of concepts and in experiments in controlled conditions in laboratories, but does it really work in the real world? So that's where we took a broad-based approach, and we reached out to some of the existing, you could call them competitors, but existing players in the market who are using similar technology for other purposes. And we reached out there to understand what is the delta between the numbers that we are getting from the research papers and the numbers that we would really get on the ground. Basically, how much carbon, metric tons of carbon captured versus value generated. So that's number one. And the second challenge that I have been facing right now is connecting to investors and convincing investors of the long-term value. And I think for that, I would say that we should go back to the first principles of business, and the first principles of business is have a good strategy and have a strong team. So that's where we are now, and we are preparing ourselves for our first seed round.
Okay, thank you, Gaurav. And I'll pick on that word that you used, team, and Sara mentioned it as well. And maybe a question for all of you, starting with Sara. What exactly are you looking for the perfect team? So and what would be your advice be on the one hand to scientists who want to want to create a new venture in terms of building a team, what would you advise them to do? If they're what components are they likely to be missing? And maybe for you, Ash, when you work with your colleagues at CERN, those who are looking to commercialize, what do you advise them, and how do you help them in terms of building a team? And then we'll finally get an answer from Gaurav, back to Gaurav, about how you're going to build out your team to make this a successful venture. Maybe starting with you, Sara.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I like to start maybe by saying that the pool of talent, entrepreneurs in Europe, I think is growing, which is is great. So we're getting fantastic technical people with deep knowledge in what we are doing. I think that's great. I think for biotech, I think it requires more than just very well trained people. I think it requires a slightly different DNA, which I think we're really building in Europe. I'll give you two examples. One is when we are planning experiments, say preclinical experiments. As investors on the board, we provide guidance, strategic guidance. But often happens that a couple of months later, the scientists come back and say, well, let's do a different experiment. And then when you look at what they're proposing, you see that they're really massively dropped the risk that we should be taking. And it's about, you do the experiment, is going to be positive. Where are you learning from that? And they're really designing experiment not to fail, not to see something that was unexpected. So that's really disappointing. I mean, again, fantastically trained people, but when you are confronted with that, you feel like maybe you're not the best person for this company. Another one is when you really push them into the market to raise capital. And when you do that for the first time as a seed company, within a month, which is, it's not easy to do, within the month, they come back and then, some of them are totally depressed because they say, well, the market stinks and says that we're ugly, that we're never going to succeed. This is too difficult, impossible. And then you think about, but this is supposed to be like this. We're supposed to be doing extremely difficult things. What did you expect? If it was easy, my mother could do that. So in a way, I think they have not calibrated very well, what deep tech, biotech we're trying to do. We're trying to do things that everybody's telling you that you're going to fail. Everybody's going to tell you will fail, you will fail, you will fail. And the beautiful thing about my job is when I see people, CEOs, entrepreneurs, scientists, that in the face of the adversity, when 99% of the people are telling you, you are going to fail, this is ugly, they grow double their size and they say, I'll show you. It's like, I'll prove you wrong. And we hold on to these people because they are gold. And we're happy to have a number of CEOs with that type of DNA that say, I will prove you wrong. I'm here to solve very difficult problems. So this is all, in a way, my opinion about talent.
Fantastic. Thank you, Sara, for that very dynamic response. Fantastic. And Ash, at CERN.
100%, right? So for me, it's exactly what Sara said. You want to find people with chip on their shoulders, right? Mm-hmm. If it looks like it's going to be your presentation is going to be one before the actual final committee presentation, you're not taking risks, right? So you need to push to an edge to saying that this will not work. And then we go and ask them to go outside of the CERN bubble, go outside of the academic bubble to actually talk with people, right? And then they get, what's your cost of good? What's your unit economics? And they say, well, I bought one gold-plated with as much as possible because I had a big research budget to do it. But then when you have to get the same performance at a budget, then they're like, well, this doesn't work, right? And so they push us to the edge to saying, how can I get the same performance and then cost optimize it? Because, I build something faster, cheaper, so I'm going to sell it cheaper. I'm like, don't sell it cheaper because the market's already paying at a really premium price. So you can actually target that price and add premium because you got something better. So those suddenly makes me look like a genius to all of these physicists, but it's just random concept that they're not used to, right? And so it's just make them aware what's outside, move them outside the bubble. And the good ones, unicorns in my books at CERN, are the ones who have the chip in the shoulders and like, I got to prove all of them wrong. So when we find people, I throw the kitchen sink at it so that, Those are great people in my books.
Terrific, Ash, and yeah, we've seen you're doing a good job at CERN there. We've seen the fruits of your work. Fantastic. Gaurav, for you as an entrepreneur, how are you going to build out your team, and who are you looking for now at this point in your venture?
So this is one of the things that we did very early. So as I said, go back to first principles of strategy, team, and financing, right? So one of the things that we did about the team is identify what are some of the key expertise areas that we need in the management team for the startup. And one of them is a researcher who has spent at least 10 odd years in algae technology. And that's paramount. Reason being, reasons have already been said by Ash and by Sara. So that's a very strong signal to the investors that we know what we're doing, and we are not blue-eyed getting into a venture where we'll be probably disengaging in 6 months' time. So that's number one. Second is to also think strategically about who you want on the team as co-founder, who do you want on the team as a first set of employees, or who do you want on the team as a set of board of advisors. That also, again, is a very, very strong signal, both for the investors as well as it's the shielding that you build around your company to ensure that if you do tend to go astray, then your board of advisors who are coming from that industry or coming from fundraising or coming from the business side will put you back in scope with the right heading angle. So that's what I have been using for building my team right now.
Okay, great. And I guess anybody interested, they should we can connect to you on LinkedIn, I guess, if they're interested.
Yes, absolutely. And actually, LinkedIn has been a great source. So, and INSEAD network has been a great source. So I already got a few warm introductions to some ex-CTOs of organizations that were in similar business. So that's already amazing, because where do you get that?
Fantastic. Sara, you mentioned sort of being in Europe from a team point of view, that things are quite good here in Europe for that. I was wondering and something that Ash and I saw last week at Hello Tomorrow was a very strong presence from the EIC, the European Commission, and the funding bodies that are the national funding bodies. In France, we have the BPI as well, which is a big investor in deep tech. How important do you think is the role of these national or pan-national sort of more state funding bodies? Are you attracted, as a private investor, investor with private capital? Do you see it as a big advantage if one of your ventures has got funding from some kind of a state body? So how big a role does it play?
I have to be careful how I answer this question.
Yes, okay.
I think there's always a good equilibrium, right? I think I love the healthy tension of private capital, because in a perfect world, I think the best ideas get the capital. And I think with some of these national funding initiatives, I think all the ideas get capital. So there's no triage there. I think in the beginning, it probably makes sense to get things off the ground. But at the end of the day, most of the capital should come from private capital, where I think you really have to fight so hard to prove that you're so much better, that you really deserve this capital above every other company that is trying to do the same thing. So I think it has to be, and I think there is in most countries a good balance, between both.
Okay, yeah, I was talking to a VC last week who'd said, actually, if a company's looking for 10 million and they've already got 10 million in sort of in subsidies, it kind of it does make their equity worth a little bit more. So there is a sort of I guess if there's if you can keep the control, they were quite attracted to having some component of.
I agree. I think in general, too much money in the system makes people complacent, whether it's public, or not. I think in certain countries in Europe, there's certain countries too much public money to the point that some of these scientists, clinician scientists, don't need private capital to go into the clinic, and they just don't listen to anything. They just go in their tunnel vision, and I just don't think is the best use of taxpayer money. So I think we always need to. I think government should really think about what the balance is. I think in Switzerland, it's always the other extreme. There's almost no government funding. I think they really believe in private capital should be funding these ideas, at least in biotech. But I think it's a question of the equilibrium and the amount. I think too much capital in the system also makes people lazy.
Okay. Yeah.
And Adrian, can I add to that? And
yes,
I want
please.
to give a practical example of what Sara said. So we were living this, they're trying to balance these two worlds, right? So I completely agree that private capital is what will keep you honest and honest to the business to create value. But on the other hand, the government grants and incentives can be a strategic tool to also get into the market. So in our case, there are government grants available in Germany, which then become a tool for us to reduce the acquisition cost for the customer by almost 80,000 euros per unit per project in a year. So that's a clear value add for the customer. If they go with our solution, then you basically get that value. Additionally, I found it really helpful to talk to some of these organizations, because the set of assessment criteria that they have to assess the business, that already became a good template for me to even prepare any kind of DD documents. So that's how I see I have been balancing it.
Okay, thank you, Gaurav, for that. So last on that topic, last comment from Ash, because obviously CERN is an enormous research institution that is entirely financed by governments, and I was amazed. Bill and I think were both surprised when we came to CERN to discuss the collaboration the first time that your innovations are actually largely open source, for the reasons of the national funding. So what's your opinion of this, Ash, given that the whole of CERN is funded by taxpayers' money?
Look, so we're funded by 31 countries' taxpayers' money. So you can add layers of bureaucracy on top of that. So look, for us, our infrastructure is paid for, our salaries are paid for this, for the purpose of understanding what we don't know. So we are basic fundamental science without any application other than high energy physics. So we go to the market and say, hey, look, I'm looking for this. Can you supply? And nobody has it. So we had to build it. And this was the case in 2008 when we built the LHC operational. Every product that we had to was like, there's nothing out there. We have to invent it. And then it had applications outside for medical imaging and everything that followed. For us, it's more, since we've already paid for, I don't want to make more money out of it. So we go open science, open source hardware, open source software. We wrote an open source hardware license and open sourced it. So we are fully there. So but the challenge is there's a lot of external views that like open source doesn't work for commercialization, which is not necessarily true. It means that it's a tried and tested software, which has got enough backing behind a community that you already have a big community base to go sell it to. You build a commercial layer on top of it to saying, how do you do SLAs? How do you service those customer base? To go to a CIO and saying, look, I can give you 99.9% uptime, which we won't and we can't. So there is that model that works. But we are not optimized for income. We are optimized for impact. And I know it's a word that is used a lot. We really want our stuff to go outside and have applications outside. So we build prototypes and give it for people for free to saying, see in another application that you want to use. The best example is last year, Gemba students are using one of our chips for a use case. and 4 of them are not physicists. And this is a ASIC. They're not engineers or semiconductor experts. We built a chip, put it on an evaluation board, gave it to them, and they went and talked with a $2 billion company to say, hey, we've got this. And they loved it because they've been trying to build it for 3 years and they couldn't. So our view is we're going to give it to people who can go figure out use cases, because we can't sit at CERN and figure out where else can it be used. We are already at TRL 9 because we implemented at LHC. But if you go to another use case, you start from a lower TRL, but we want to get it as a toolkit so that they can implement fast. So that's pretty much where we come from.
Thank you. Actually, that's a good segue to a question I had, and we'll soon go over to questions from the audience. But I had one question about intellectual property. So ironically, at CERN, your innovations, if we're from one of the member countries, the 31 member countries, we have access to those technologies and can take them out. I spoke to a couple of entrepreneurs again last week at Hello Tomorrow, and they each had different views on this. One of them said to me, Adrian, you know, he had an interesting deep tech venture, and he said, I'm not going to waste time patenting my idea. I just need to get speed to market. And also, one interesting thing he said he actually didn't want to file a patent or patents because he didn't want to expose the secret source behind it. So maybe for all of you, what's your opinion on to patent or not to patent, and how do you protect yourself, or is it really necessary? Maybe again, starting with you, Sara, what would your opinion be on this?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, patents is sort of the lifeblood of what we do, right? I think at some point, patents determine how long your revenues, how large your revenues, will be. I think patenting, it's a must, and I think obviously you can, you have control over when you file your provisional. But I think, we're not the smartest kid on the block, right? We know there's smarter people out there trying to do the same, and we all read the same publications. We all read the same. So if we think about it, we know that somebody else has thought about it. So it's either who files first. So I think we try to find a good compromise between the timing of the filing, but the filing is avoidable. I mean, we will not be able to sell a company to a large pharma without very strong protection, strong claims behind the drug. I mean, that is simple. I mean, so it's a matter of how you draft the claims and when to file.
Okay, yeah, I guess in the pharma business, patent as you say is a must, and probably in some other areas it would be debatable. And maybe Gaurav, to you, are you filing patents?
As of now, no. So a simple reason for that, we stand on shoulders of giants. So there's about 40 years of science behind this science that we are standing on. And we are looking at operations as the competitive advantage for our venture. The science behind photobioreactors is pretty open. You can build photobioreactor at your home, but the point is, can you build an efficient photobioreactor that really generates high quality biomass? And that's where operational intelligence comes in. That's where operational engineering comes in. So that would be our USP. And at some point, if it would make sense to patent that, we would consider, but right now, no.
Okay. And Ash, what's your position, given that CERN offers all these innovations as open source to the community?
So although we are open science, we still have patents. We have a patent family or 18 patent families. The reason being, in certain industries, without it, you can't commercialize this, you still need it. So we go inside, make sure that we protect the invention. So for me, there's actually, the two sides to it. One, the life sciences world, where the patent system works brilliant. The licensees understand it, the VCs understand it, the academics understand it. So it's a linear process. You don't have a patent, you're not protected the molecule, you're not going to commercialize because a long tail through your FDA approvals, you need to have that because you're going to have 10 more years after that to actually make money out of it. But if you come to that non-life sciences, physical sciences on sensors, et cetera, the process is delayed, the invention is a lot more faster, and your last product will have a multiple set of patents. So then if you do royalty stacking, it doesn't necessarily work as efficient as how it works in the life science market. That being said, either if you protect something, either you're going to have monopoly because you're stopping others, or you're suing others from copying you, right? So either you go offensive or defensive. My mentor used to say, if you're going to go to a fruit fight, at least take a grape. If you are in a patent lawsuit, if you're in the market, if you don't have any patents, you're going to be the sitting duck. And either you can look at it as an 800-pound gorilla suing you on a patent infringement because they're scared of what you do, but you still need to have some of your core IP protected. So irrespective of how the patent system is being inefficient, I still think that's the only viable option right now on how to protect inventions. Whether it works good or not, that's a whole other debate. My opinion is it doesn't. When you add CRISPR to it, to new inventions in computer science, AI, I think the IP model is at its breaking point, but it's not going to change as fast as what we want or as fast as innovations are happening. But that's a system that we have. So if you don't file it, you're missing out, because when you get your valuation on exit, the intangible assets are on IP. And that's not science. And based on what your demand is, your valuation goes up because of how much patents you have. So I don't think it's a binary of should I or should I not. If you're in deep tech and if you don't have patents on your books, you're missing out.
Okay, thank you, all of you, for those answers. I'll take some of the questions that have come through on the chat. Starting at the top, we have a Vadim Shpak who asks, it's a question mainly for Ash, but Sara and Gaurav, you may want to contribute too. In the present financial landscape, have you faced any obstacles in obtaining investment for startups that originated from CERN? And what strategies do you employ to overcome these challenges?
I mean, so first part of it, there's always a financial challenge, right? If it is 2000, there was a crash, 8 was a crash, 17 was a crash, then was COVID. So there always going to be problems with funding, but the VC industry has enough dry powder to invest in good technologies and good businesses. So once you get your storytelling right to saying, why is it good? What was it used for? Where do you see it? At least then I don't think the challenges, to quote Sara, when the money is short, only the fittest survive. So you really have to fight for that money. So which pushes people not to be lazy and go chase that money. The second part of it is, what are the strategies do you employ to overcome? Pick the people who understand that market. So if I go to a VC who's never invested in biotech and give them a molecule and they would not understand what it is, I would rather go to Sara to get investment because she understands that industry. If I've got a semiconductor chip, go to the people who invest in semiconductors and not a generalist VC who's investing in SaaS business models, because they can't translate and connect those. So horses for courses, whoever have that expertise can see the value in it. So when you match those, I don't think there is a challenge. But when you go to the brand name big ones who invest in, across spray and pray modules, you really have that hard thing of getting money. So we pick and choose who matches the technology. Thank
you, Ash. And Sara, I think the question applies equally to you. How are you affected by the current financial landscape?
Fundraising is really tough. 99% of the people say no to biotechs. It doesn't matter if it's early, mid-stage, late stage. There's a lot of capital, but it's difficult to get this capital moving into companies, at least today in the last couple of years. I think I used to be pretty, pouting about people saying no, and it's like, why they don't see what I see. And I think over time, you learn to say, okay, I expect to know, but I want to get something out of it. Why is it? And I think it is a course in humility, right? People say no. Sometimes it has nothing to do with you, and there's nothing you can control. It has nothing to do with you. Sometimes it has to do with you. They just don't like you. There's no chemistry. Can you try to change it? Difficult. And sometimes it's how you tell the story, the timing, the macro. So I think it's good to not take it too personal and grow from it, and go back and not take it too personal, as I said. And at the end of the day, I do believe that the good ideas that are well executed will find the capital. But today, it's not that you come out of your house and you get a check. I mean, that's far from the reality. And you still have to fight so hard to tell your story every day. And sometimes the story is not well told. And we've learned, I mean, I've learned that sometimes the way I told the story, it's just people don't get it. And I think after a while, if people just don't get it, then it's a reflection on me, how I tell the story or how my team tells the story. So I think it's good to have that humility to reflect on the feedback from the market.
So would you agree, Sara, with what Jeff Bezos says, that many bad projects get financed because they're presented well, and many good projects don't get financed because they're presented badly?
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
And on that note, Gaurav, for you, how I expect you'll be going out fundraising soon. Are you, what's your feeling of the market right now? Are you getting a good response?
Yeah, so to echo Ash, there's quite a bit of dry powder, but it's not available to everyone. So the most essential thing that we are focusing on right now is that we can show a path to commercialization that is believable, and financial projections that are that show that we have a ear to the ground. So by commercialization, I mean a set of handful of customers, maybe MOUs with those customers that at this stage in the venture, they will come up and be our customers in that stage for that set of product features. So that's how we are tiering it. And so we are going in for stage financing right from the start.
Okay. Great. Well, good luck with that, Gaurav. And I'm going to combine two questions. There's one from Philippe Langard, where he talks about the multi-year process of trial and error, and one from my friend Johan Sundberg, who's a great contributor to INSEAD as well, and an INSEAD alumnus. In Johan's question, it's really about the lean methodology. You know, we learn when we teach entrepreneurship, non-deep tech entrepreneurship, we talk about the lean methodology, and you get something out quickly, throw it out there, and see what sticks, get feedback from the customer, and then iterate. That's tricky in deep tech. Or do you see a way that we can really apply lean in deep tech building? Gaurav, let's start with you.
I would say yes, and I like how Johan has framed the question, right? So shallow tech, and I would say deep tech is probably in biotechnology, not so much, and I'm not too much initiated into that space, but at least in the space that we are working in, we have an opportunity to develop our business as a set of shallow techs staggered on top of each other. And that's basically what lean is, right? That you have an MVP that you have proven with a customer, and not just in a lab by yourself, but really with the customer. You've really understood that you're working on a customer requirement that they are willing to pay dollars for, and not just something that you think is an amazing solution. But when you go out there, no one is ready to buy it, because it's too much hassle installing, it's probably going to distract their existing workforce, etc., 1,000 reasons. So it's very, very important to have those short feedback loops with the customer in the loop in this case. And yes, it's easier said than done, obviously, but that's the hard part.
Okay, thank you, Gaurav. Ash, lean methodology?
Look, so the pivots don't really work. If you're building a chip, you still build a chip. You're building a laser company, you're still building lasers. So you can't pivot into something else. So, and you can't really build fast. Your prototyping takes time. However, there's a lot of the lean methodology which transfers over is, how do you do your customer journey, your value proposition mapping, because the segment that you operate in would need to have the same critical to qualities, the same cost to sell, so that if you get your segmentation right, and then you can figure out your cost to make, and so that part works. But necessarily the customer journey is great, but your costs and the prices and path to market and channel and distributions are rather going to be different, right? And the MVP is dependent, right? I mean, most of them think they have an MVP because it's at the lab. So you have to bring your customer to the lab, rather you can't take it to your customer. So it needs a little bit of amendment because of the nature of the product and the nature of the tech. And it's always solution first because you haven't figured out the problem other than your own problem. So it works, but you still need to tweak a little bit.
Okay. And Sara, finally, in the pharma and biotech arena, can you apply lean?
Maybe not so much. I think, there's nothing fast about what we do. I mean, it takes 3 months to plan, or 6 months to plan a mouse model, get into a CRO. So I think, in a way, the timelines are what they are. As I said, this is a heavily regulated industry. I think we try to plan the most difficult experiments. And then if it fails, it fails. It's difficult to pivot. Not impossible, but it's difficult to pivot in what we do. At the end of the day, you're matching biology to a disease, which you think it has a great match. If it fails, then you have to find, another case where that match is fantastic. It's not so easy. It's not impossible, but it's not easy.
Yeah. Thank you, Sara and Ash and Gaurav. We'll take one more question from the audience, or maybe we'll try and fit in a second one. But just a comment from Nicolas Gibault, who contributed to our program at CERN and actually came down and gave a presentation. So Nicolas helps deep tech companies in Europe get funding, and he works a lot on the European funding programs. And he just makes a comment: partners, patent is a must in order to argue differentiation from competitors in the case of funding programs that he works with. So that reiterates Sara's point. So if you want to get funding from the European Union or from other national, Nicolas says you better have some patents, basically. Question for Gaurav: what are the specific things you're hearing investors ask for as you look to raise your seed round? Metrics, partnership agreements, etc.
So they ask for proof of concept papers. So they would ask for what are some of the results that you're getting, what's the science behind it. So basically show it. Then also what kind of market validation work we have done. And also increasingly, they would look at the team and want to talk to the team. Okay. To get a different perspective, and not just me pitching to them, but they would rather also want to talk to the team and get a full perspective on where we are. These are the top 3 things that I would say. And of course, use of funds is always a topic, right? If you're asking them money, so how are you going to use the funds? And in great detail, not like a pie chart, but as much detail as possible that you can provide people like Sara, that's helpful. Okay.
So just in the interest of time, very quick question for Sara. And that question, by the way, for you, Gaurav, was from Haley Moller. And then a final question from Ludovic Chopin to Sara. What is the typical stage or advancement of biotech companies you invest in terms of preclinical proof, or do you first need a clinical study?
So we're pretty agnostic, and thanks for the question. We're pretty agnostic to where we invest. It can be clinical stage, it can be preclinical stage. At the end of the day, there has to be that marriage between biology and unmet need. And I think unmet need, of course, is totally subjective. Luckily, as an industry, we've done, I think, pretty well in the sense that we have pretty good drugs out there for many diseases. And the trick is finding these pockets of opportunity where a subpopulation of patients don't respond, or they have side effects, and find the drug that can serve that population. So it's becoming more and more difficult. I think for us is that subpopulation of patients that are not being served today. What does the biology look like in the disease, and can we find the drug? Sometimes we find a drug that is in clinical stage, great, we license. Sometimes there's nothing, so we start from scratch. But I think that's, we take a lot of risk. I think back to the previous question to Gaurav, we feel that in the market today, in general, I think investors in general are not taking enough risk. I think things can fail. We know the downside, but at least we're pretty happy that the amount of risk that we're taking, but it always starts with the biology and the disease, matching those.
Wonderful. So I'm afraid we've run out of time, but Sara, Ash, Gaurav, thank you very much. I'll hand over to Bill for final thanks and the last word.
Yeah, I just want to thank our panelists, Sara, Gaurav, and Ash, for joining us. Thank you very much, you busy people. We really appreciate it. Also to Sandra and Pascal for helping us air this panel on deep tech, which is very near and dear to Adrian and my hearts, and for the team at Digital INSEAD. And these technologies we've been talking about are going to impact everyone's lives. I think much more quickly than you may anticipate. AI is only going to accelerate that. And so thank you for joining us and all the great questions. Have a wonderful day. And we look forward to the next tech talk on Digital INSEAD.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks.